Scott Morrison says it is time governments took a step back out of people's lives. It's drawn backlash from state leaders.
Well. Very interesting news today. Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister of Australia, has spoken out against the states mandating the vaccines upon all of its workers. Just have a listen to what he has to say.
Australians have done their part. It's now time for them to be able to step forward with their lives and for governments to step back out of their lives.
It follows mass protests in Victoria against vaccine mandates and pandemic laws.
Well, of course, those threats and intimidation has no place in Australia. We're a civil, peaceful society. Where we have disagreements, we don't handle them with violence.
Should be considered violent to jab someone with a needle. That's the violent situation here. That's what people are opposing. That's what people are protesting about, is the violence from the government upon its citizens. Sticking a needle into somebody's arm is violent. Violence in this with threats saying that you're not going to have a job if you don't get the jab. Let's hear what else he has to say.
And there can be no tolerance for that. And there should be no tolerance for that. No matter how frustrated people might be, that is never the answer, and there needs to be the respect shown in those debates that we have. There has to be an appropriate balance and civility. Of course, there are many people who are feeling frustrated. I mean, over the last couple of years, governments have been telling Australians what to do. Now, there's been a need for that as we've gone through the pandemic, but the time is now to start rolling all of that back. Australians have kept their part of the deal. More than 80% of Australians are now double dose vaccinated. We now have one of the highest vaccination rates in the world.
And the only reason that we've probably had the highest vaccination rates in the world is because of the mandates from each state forcing workers to get the jab or have no job. So I wonder how many people out there have the jab now because they felt forced or coerced into getting this jab. Coercion is not consent, and now there's people out there that are probably rushed out and got this jab and wish that they hadn't, and that's probably why the rates are going up, because most people just tend to give up on their beliefs in, I'm not going to get this thing, but I better go get it because I've got to keep my job. So how many out there have actually gone to get the jab due to threats from the government about losing their job? So that's probably why we have the highest vaccination rate, because there's people that probably don't want to be vaccinated that have just gone out to get the vaccination just to get the government off our back so people don't lose their jobs over it.
We've had one of the strongest economies to come through the pandemic, and we have one of the lowest fatality rates from COVID in the world. Australians have done an amazing job when it comes to leading us through this pandemic. But now it's time for governments to step back and for Australians to take their lives back, and for Australians to be able to move forward with the freedoms that should be theirs. That's certainly what we're doing as a federal government. That's where we see it going. Our position on mandatory vaccines, for example, is in very specific circumstances. We're not in favour of mandatory vaccines imposed by the government. Businesses can make their own choices under the law, but we're not about telling them what to do or telling Australians what to do.
Australian government, you know that what you're doing is wrong. That's why you're speaking out finally against the states. The states know that it's wrong. Federally, it is unconstitutional to impose such mandates upon Australian citizens. No jab, no job policy is a humanitarian issue. No job, no jab.
Vaccines only are mandatory in cases where you've got health workers that are working with vulnerable people. That's what our medical advice has always been. And as we get above 80% in particular, which the scientific advice shows us and the research shows us, that means Australians can have their lives back. They should be able to go and get a cup of coffee in Brisbane when you're over 80%, regardless of whether you've had the vaccines or not.
Yes, Scott Morrison, you and your governments have been telling people what to do, all right? You've been telling people that if they don't get the jab, they don't get the job. You particularly haven't, Scott Morrison. You've been quiet on the issue and letting the state leaders do the dirty work. Now you're trying to stand up because there's an election coming soon. Morrison is trying to obtain votes by doing this, but it is good that he's doing this because it is wrong, and I think he knows that it is unconstitutional to be doing such things and forcing people to get needles in their arm in order to go to work. It is absolutely ridiculous when you look at the death rate of the pandemic that we're in. I can understand the vulnerable. If you're over 65, go and get the vaccine. Go get the vaccine, whatever. But if you're not, then get the vaccine if you want it. But if you don't want it, so be it. Anyway, about time this came to light, because I've only got a month and a half to go before Western Australian government has forced this. So hopefully it can get some traction by the 31st of December and West Australians won't have to be forced into doing this.
We've got to understand that it is time to move forward, not for governments to hold people back. And that's certainly what the federal government is doing. That's what we're doing. Australians have kept their part of the deal. They've gone and got vaccinated. They've pushed through this pandemic. It's time for Australians to be able to have those freedoms back because of what they have achieved. They've earned it back. It was never something that certainly our government rushed towards. It's not something that comes naturally to us, but it was necessary for a time, and that time, as we've now hit 80%, double dose vaccinations means Australians should reclaim those freedoms.
Anyway, thanks for watching this Hang Loose Recluse production. Thank you.
We need subscribers. Your support is appreciated. Please hit the subscribe button. And if you don't subscribe, fuck you. Thank you.